Hello, and you're very welcome to another Virgin Media Wholesale Webinar. I'm Conor Quinn, the Wholesale Sector Manager here at Virgin Media Business. We are nearly at the midway point in the year, so it's a good opportunity to check in and have another up-to-date discussion. In our last discussion, we were joined by the team at Infinera to launch our high-capacity Infinity network. We discussed how high-capacity networks can pave the way to the great acceleration. Some key points we uncovered in that last session were the consumer bandwidth usage is set to continue to grow, telecoms network capacities are scaling up, and the speed of technology change is happening at an exponential rate. In today's webinar, we discussed the theme of transitioning through times of flux. The term times of flux really relates to when actions and attitudes are changing from what they once had been. There is an old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. And I think it would be fair to say that we are alive at very interesting times in 2022. According to the World Bank, global growth is expected to decline from 5.5% to 4.1%. There is now also a clear consensus that the European Central Bank will raise interest rates in July for the first time in more than a decade. The CSO latest figures show inflationary increases as the Consumer Price Index now hits 8.3% as of May 2022. The world's geopolitical and economic and social landscapes are under constant change, and just how this will affect both markets and consumer trends still remains to be seen. Yet on balance, we are also find ourselves in the middle of a fast-paced digital revolution, in which technology advances promise to lead the way to creating new industries and a great possibility that new jobs will be brought into existence in the coming years. At the forefront of these possibilities is the metaverse. The metaverse is defined as a digital reality that combines aspects of social media, online gaming, augmented reality, virtual reality, and cryptocurrencies to allow users to interact virtually. Global consulting firm McKinsey & Company has forecasted that the metaverse may generate up to 5 trillion in revenues in 2030. More than 120 billion has already flowed into metaverse space in 2022. So be it Fortnite, Roblox, or a torrent of new AI-based platforms, the metaverse has already arrived. So to help us to make some sense of this, and to share some thoughts, I would like to introduce our special guest for today, a man who may need no introduction and who regularly lends his voice to such matters, the Irish Times Consumer Affairs correspondent, Conor Pope.
Thanks very much, Cormac. It really wasn't supposed to be like this, was it? I mean, I think if we were to be honest with ourselves, most of us had a narrative ready to go over the course of the pandemic. Russia invaded Ukraine, and all bets were off again. So then we had what was constantly talked about over a period of months. We were told that the inflation that we were living through, the spike in energy prices, the spike in food prices, we were told, oh, it's transitionary. It's only going to be a small thing. It'll last maybe till May, maybe till June. And with the war and with the changing economic climate, everything became much more profound. Now, a couple of days ago, I was writing a big piece for the Irish Times about a major piece of research carried out by Behaviour and Attitudes about the state of the nation. And they carry out this research every year. And they talk about consumer sentiment and where we are. And they have dubbed now an age of hyper-uncertainty. Hyper-uncertainty. And I'd even go further and say it's hyper-anxiety. Because it's not so much that there's a terrible war happening in the East, and that's terrible. It's not so much that we're living through a rate of inflation that nobody in Ireland has seen since the 1980s. And it's not so much that we still have COVID on our shoulder. It's that we don't know what happens next. And I think that's the really scary thing. Nobody knows what happens next. And I've spoken to a couple of analysts about this, about how consumer sentiment is being shaped. And it's not just the financial predicament that people find themselves in. There's an emotional element to this too. And I think we'd be wrong to understate that emotional element, because it's all well and good to say that we have no money. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But it's more about we're afraid. And we've been afraid for such a long time. As people, as consumers, because we were afraid during COVID, now we're afraid for the economy. And talking about the economy, according to the ESRI, a study published last week, inflation is kind of set to average around 7% this year. Now, 7% is wildly out of sync with what we've experienced in recent times. And it could even be worse than that. And at best, wages are likely to increase by 3.5% across the board. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Certainly not a lot more. Now, that means that we're all going to be worse off by 3.5–4% in terms of our wages because of inflation. But the picture is gloomier than that. And I'm not going to focus entirely on the bleak. I hope maybe, Cormac, to finish on an upbeat note, if I can find one. But it's worse than that, because then you have the utility prices. And what we've seen with utility prices is they've gone up by 20, 30, 40%. And that's, that takes maybe €1,000. 1,200, 1,500 euros out of somebody's pocket. And then you have food prices. Now, food is the biggest spend outside of a mortgage. So let's say food goes up by, your grocery spending goes up by 10%. That's another 700 quid that you're down. So if you add the energy costs of, let's say, 1,300 quid, and you add the food costs of maybe 700 quid, and then you add the higher cost of diesel or petrol, and add another maybe 800 quid onto your spending, that's about 2,800 euros. Now that's after tax, which means that we all have to earn an additional 6 grand just to make up for those higher increases. And the bad news is that, of course, things are going to get worse, because it's the end of June now, and we know that in July, the European Central Bank are going to raise their interest rates. They probably might raise them by 1/4 point. And then we know that in September, the European Central Bank is going to raise its interest rates by maybe another 1/4 point, maybe 1/2 point. And we know, even though we don't have crystal balls, that the European Central Bank is going to raise its interest rates again in December by another 1/4 point. Now, every time they do that, it takes money out of our pockets. Now, you can completely understand why they have no real choice, because interest rates are effectively the only lever that a central bank has when it comes to trying to put a lid on inflation. Years ago, I was at an event hosted by Dennis O'Brien and some super rich people that I didn't even know in the Shelburne Hotel, and he talked and said that broadband was a human right, and they were talking about giving broadband to the developing world, and people were going, broadband a human right, really? I don't know if it's a human right. But he's right, it is a human right. We need it to work, we need it for a leisure, we need it to live today. But people look at broadband, people look at the television streaming services, or they're looking at the Wi-Fi in their homes, and they're going, well, why is that going up in price? And I'm not saying it has, but they're looking at like, why would that go up in price? Because, there's a fixed cost there. There's no associated costs to the broadband sellers, and they don't realise that the huge energy drain that comes from using broadband, the massive amounts of money that the providers have to spend just to keep the show on the road. And I think people need to maybe understand that everything is interlinked. The price of everything is connected. And I think that's a responsibility that your industry has to explain to people that you're not gouging them, you're not ripping them off when price increases come, but that these are the costs of doing business, and you have no choice but to pass at least some of them on. So I want to talk then about what we can all do, and what businesses in particular can do, because it's very difficult to deal with rising prices when everything is beyond our control. I mean, we can't control the market forces all over the world that are driving up inflation in every single country. We're kind of powerless. So you have to work out, well, what are the differentiators? What are the things that will make my business? What are the things that will make my company, whether I'm dealing with the domestic market, the retail market, whether I'm dealing with wholesalers, what is the thing that makes me stand out? Because we can't be lowering our price. We can't get into this endless price war because nobody can afford it. We'll just go out of business. And the only thing then you have is customer service. Now, as some of you may know, one of the key things that I do as part of my job is I represent, if that's not too grand a word, I represent the interests of consumers. So consumers have a bad time with a business, they contact me, I contact the business, and we try and get the problem resolved. I'd say the vast majority of the complaints that I get, not the vast majority, but certainly the majority of complaints I get are about telecoms. And that's because telecoms are so central to our lives, and when things go wrong, it really impacts us. There's a reason why the credit union isn't front and centre when it comes to complaints. It's because people don't interact with the credit union every day. But people interact with their telecoms providers every single day. So if the service goes down, or if it's patchy, or if prices go up, or if they're billed wrongly, that impacts them on a day-to-day basis. So then the question is, why do I get so many complaints about telecoms? And the anatomy of every single complaint is pretty identical. I mean, the details change. But Mary has a service. There's something wrong with the service. Mary contacts the service provider ignores her. Mary contacts the service provider again. She's ignored again. Mary contacts them again. She's ignored again. Then Mary contacts me. I contact the service provider, and in 30 seconds the problem is fixed. Now that's pretty much the case every single time. So the question I have then for people working in your industry is, why is it like that? Why is Mary being ignored the first time? Why is it that when the Irish Times contacts any telecoms provider, the problem can be fixed in a day, but when the individual consumer contacts them, the problem goes on and on and on and on and on. And I think one of the reasons is empowerment. And that's why I think companies need to empower their staff more to do the right thing more often. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. I mean, there's an example I sometimes give when I'm talking to people about this. It's an insurance company in the UK. And what they did was they set aside a discretionary spend for their frontline customer care workers. And they said, you've got £20 to spend on customer care. So you can offer them a €20 discount if they call, or whatever it might be. But you can spend that £20 in whatever way you want. And this woman contacted the insurance company. It was a car insurance company, and she was totally frazzled because she'd just been in an accident, not a serious accident, but her car had been badly damaged. And she'd went to find her insurance cert, and she'd found out that her 3-year-old toddler had scribbled all over the insurance cert, making it illegible. So she was in a total flap, and she was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be able to claim on my insurance because my insurance cert is ruined. She called to the insurance company. The woman on the other end of the phone spoke to her, heard her problem, said, don't worry, missus, we're going to give you a new insurance cert by return post. You'll be grand, you'll be able to make the claims, no problem. And then she used £3 of her discretionary spend to go out and buy a packet of crayons, which she included in the envelope with the insurance cert. And she wrote a little note. And the little note said, here's your insurance cert, miss, and here's a packet of crayons for your daughter. Now, it cost €3, but it absolutely transformed the consumer experience that the distressed woman had. And the reason why it transformed it, and this is where I'm going to finish, is it made the woman feel important, and it made her feel like a human being. And it made her feel like the person at the other end of the phone cared about her. And I think if we were to do that more, as a society, as an industry, to make people realise that you actually cared about their problems, well, I think we wouldn't be able to resolve the price spirals that we're witnessing, but we would be able to create a scenario where people had a better customer service experience with the people they were dealing with, and I think that would be a good outcome for people in the weeks and months ahead. And now, of course, we're going to have a panel conversation. People are going to submit questions. We're going to try and answer them as best we can. So if you just stay tuned, we'll be back to you in a minute.
Okay, thanks Conor, that's much appreciated and very informative. So we'll head over now to our panel discussion where we'll be joined by some of our experts. So over to our first introduction, which is going to be Gavin Murphy, who's Head of Operations and joining us here today. We have also Noel O'Reilly, who's our Business and Product Solutions Manager. And also, last but not least, Conor Pope, journalist, broadcaster, author, customer affairs and personal finance expert. So we'll start off with a few questions, and thank you for sending in your questions today. Much appreciated. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can. I think the first one here, it's to you, Conor, and I think you may have touched on it already during your piece, and it was really a question again back on inflation. Do you see inflation as transitory or longer term? And I think you may have pointed to this one already, so well, elaborate maybe a bit.
I suppose the reality is nobody knows for sure, because if you listened to politicians, and I'm talking about eminent politicians like Pascal Donoghue, the Minister for Finance, if you listen to the people like that talking in January and February, and we're assured that it was a transitory thing and the inflation wouldn't become embedded in the economy and it would be probably done and dusted and would start to go on a downward trajectory by June. Clearly hasn't happened. What we know now is that inflation is going to go up and up and up, at least, I would say, for this year. And the big fear is that when the inflation causes significant spikes in wages, and then it becomes this cyclical effect. And I think the fear across economists all over Europe is that it is here for the longer term. And I think people will really struggle to deal with that, because we haven't been in a scenario like this since the 1980s.
Yeah, okay. Our second question as well that's coming in is directed your way, Conor. It's again from our ECB, or European Central Bank. Do we expect the rate rises to still continue? You alluded to, I think, 2 or 3 rises on your piece that you gave us.
Well, it's worth looking at what the Fed in America and the Bank of England is doing, because they're really leading it when it comes to interest rate hikes. And the Fed has been much more aggressive than the European Central Bank. And the European Central Bank is traditionally really slow when it comes to hikes and indeed rate decreases. But if you look at what's happening in America, if you look at what's happening in England, it's inevitable. As I said earlier on, there'll be these 3 hikes. I mean, you'd be a real optimist to think that we'll be done and dusted with the problems that we have now by December. So if we're not done and dusted with those problems, you could easily see hikes rolling into next year, and you could see another 2 or 3 next year. You could even see more than that. But the reality is that we're living through very uncertain times, so nobody knows for sure. But if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I would bet that we're certainly not done with the hikes, and we won't be done with the hikes by the end of this year.
Yeah, okay. Next question is actually a very relevant one, and I think it affects us in the telecoms world a lot. So I'll go to you, Gavin, first. And it's in relation to supply chains, which I think is everyone's very aware of at the moment. Do we see supply chains return to normal, or are these disruptions part of a new normal?
That's a $1 million question, Cormac, at the moment. Do I think it's the new normal? No, not necessarily, and I think we are seeing some easing. I think if we look back, we all remember when we could place an order for components and have them delivered the next week or within a matter of weeks. Those days are gone for now. We're having to plan 12 to 18 months out at the moment, which is a real sea change in how we do our planning, our forecasting, and our ordering of those components. Another thing I would say around supply chain at the moment, and I suppose it's relevant to the global telecoms industry, is we're seeing a lot of businesses stockpiling and ordering more than they actually need. And this is compounding the issues. And if anything, it's increasing prices for all of us in the industry. So I think it's very important for suppliers, for vendors to get a grip of that situation and to work more closely with their customers to manage those pipelines and deliver what companies actually need going forward.
And I think, Noel, for you, products and solutions, it's very impactful of what you're doing when you're sort of doing your planning.
Absolutely. And what I'm actually seeing now as well is that what seems to be you go to place an order and you find out that product is no longer available. They're no longer manufacturing that. So they're pushing all the manufacturing towards the latest and greatest, and that product that may have been there, that CPE or that you'd used before, is not going to manufacture anymore. So that's become all of a sudden end of life. So you need to make sure that the new product that's coming in is certified, ready to go. You got other teams looking at that. So it is very impactful. And of course, there's price changes. Yeah. And then what happens with the contract that you've signed with the customer to deliver that product's no longer there. So you're now having to reevaluate the situation. Yeah. So it does compound.
And that's probably our micro view in the telecoms world, but maybe Conor has a more macro view of overall supply chains. Maybe do you have any thoughts on how you see our the the global supply chain sort of?
Yeah, it's not looking great, and I wish I had better news. But the funny thing is, I was just thinking as the guys were talking, we've been speaking for a few minutes. I was speaking to the audience for a few minutes before that. We haven't mentioned the word Brexit. Like there was a time, like 18 months ago, when Brexit was front and centre because it was just screwing up all supply chains, and it still is.
Yeah.
But it's just that it has been taken over by all sorts of other massive problems, and Brexit hasn't gone away. In fact, Brexit is still going to be a big problem, and you have all the other issues at play. So it's not an easy thing to solve.
So don't mention the B word.
Well, I've mentioned it now.
Okay. Conor, specific question for you. I think that it's probably one that should be directed to you because I think it's probably most relevant. How is buyer behaviour changing? How we do or how we expect utility prices to trend in the future?
Well, people are becoming much more proactive in the switching market because people have, it's funny when if you talk to the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities, for instance, like 60-70% of people last year, 2 years ago, never switched electricity provider or gas provider, even though there was huge savings to be made. I think people are going to become more proactive in the switching market. But they're also, and this is based on a piece of research from Behaviour and Attitudes that we carried in the Irish Times last week, people are going to reward good customer care and good products. So if somebody finds a product, and it can be a product that they buy in the supermarket or a product they buy online. If somebody finds a product that they like and that's reliable, I think people are more inclined to stick with it because and I think, funnily enough, that's probably even more so in the telecom sector because people are very reticent to switch telecoms provider if they've got a really good telecoms provider already, because it's not like gas and it's not like electricity. When you get your electricity, it's the same electricity from all the providers. It's the same gas from all the providers. It's not quite the same when it comes to telecoms. And that really gives the good providers an advantage over the less good providers.
Brilliant. It's a nice segue because it tees up the next question, which is coming where we're hearing about the importance of the customer experience and the customer journey. So I guess that's the same thought on that. But Gavin, maybe you could share some thoughts on that.
Listen, they're vital elements nowadays, and especially in such a crowded market that we're in. We can all provide connectivity and bandwidth, and we can all deliver solutions to our customers that power their business. But the real key differentiator is customer experience. It's so vital. And I think businesses that get that right, will retain their customers and will attract new customers. And in some ways, it's the secret sauce. Because there's so many players delivering the same thing. You need to stand out from the crowd. And thankfully, Virgin Media Business has really invested very heavily in recent years in customer experience. And I'd say it's a cornerstone of the business, and it's central to I think all the decisions we make as a business as well, which is a very good thing. Very positive.
Again, the theme of transitioning through times of flux. Like, I guess the question that you come up with is, what is the greatest opportunity and the greatest threat? So that's probably an open question to all of you. And we may have touched on that with the customer services piece already. But if there's anything that you could maybe add to that, where you think is a great opportunity or a big threat.
Listen, just as I think we've kind of covered a lot of the challenges out there from supply chains and everything else that's going on. But there is lots of opportunities out there in the marketplace. We mustn't forget. We are still in the midst of a digital transformation revolution. And in some ways that was accelerated by the pandemic, and that continues. And we're seeing more and more businesses embrace digitalization, and much of that is going to be powered by the connectivity and the solutions that we as operators provide those businesses. So there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. Might contradict Conor a little bit, but there is some positive stuff out there as well. There's lots of sectors that are booming. FDI is still quite strong, and we're ranked very highly among European cities. So let's be optimistic.
Yeah, Conor.
Yeah, I think Gavin is right actually, and I know that the scenarios that I painted were pretty gloomy.
Yeah.
And it would be easy to give in to pessimism, but I think optimism is the only way we can approach the world in which we're in, and there are huge opportunities. People are more reliant on technology, and they really need good technology, and they need a good customer service experience, and that's the big opportunity. That's the reason to be optimistic, because everybody relies on this stuff, and everybody wants this stuff, and they want it to be done well. And I think the businesses, this is where the business and the consumer align. They're both in lockstep here. This is what they want, and I think that's one reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way of calling out some facts, which is what you've called out, and then but leading into some positive uptakes as well, some positive trends.
Absolutely.
Some technology revolution. Noel, a question for you. We talked about high capacity networks paving the way to the great acceleration on our last webinar.
Yeah.
Do you see the same level of bandwidth growth, from the guys in the team from Infinera? Last time we talked a lot about that sort of scaling up. Do you still see that?
That growth, that
the
curve
growth
is
in
in
the
there.
bandwidth
I mean,
capacity.
I don't see anything changing as such. I mean, it's just the growing demands. New technologies requiring different processing power, and that connectivity needs to be enhanced. When you're recently dealing with likes of film and animation, the pipes that they need to drive that business. I mean, that's just growing and growing and growing. How is that going to change in terms from connectivity, people working from home? That pipe's all changed. That's steadily increasing. We're going to see, not too distant future, 10 gig being delivered to homes. It's getting that way. So, yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Brilliant. We've heard a lot about sustainability of late. Question in here: how important is environment and sustainability focus to a business as we transit through to a greener future? And I'm going to go to you again, Noel, on this one, and maybe Conor.
Look, it's really important, and again, everybody is responsible for their own carbon footprint, and to do their bit. And likewise, the companies need to look at their power, their usage, their CPE they're putting in businesses, how they're cooling down their data centres. Is it the most efficient way of doing things? And to revise that. And there's money savings to be made by doing so as well. So it's just to make sure that you're being energy efficient. And that in itself will help reduce your carbon footprint, removing the likes of legacy equipment out of the network. These big boxes that were there for donkeys years, serving probably smaller numbers of customers now, but they should be pulled and removed, and those customers upgraded and updated with newer technology. And also, from a CP delivery, providing services into a business, there's so many people going in, adding their box and adding another box and adding a different box on top of that again. We need to consolidate that a little bit more and think about how best to serve and provide a proper, environmentally friendly service to our customers.
So Conor, is sustainability a greener future? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to pretend I know how your industry works, because I don't, and I'd never lay claim to doing that. I do think the data centre thing is interesting, because I think people are only starting to realise just how much energy data centres suck out of the national grid. And I think we're heading into a winter when, even though it would have seemed unimaginable 3 months ago, when energy rationing might become a feature of our world. And if that happens, well, then that gives the impetus for people to look more closely at data centres and saying, hey, hang on, what's going on here? Yeah. Because we all imagine the cloud as being some light and fluffy thing in the sky that just keeps all our pictures. Like, we don't realise just what the cloud is and how the idea that you have all of these servers and machines sucking energy out of the grid that maybe they don't need to be there. I think it's going to become a moral imperative on everybody to be more sustainable, and not just for the longer term and for the future of the planet, which is obviously incredibly important, but for the shorter term and the future of people this winter, next spring, next summer.
Okay, very interesting. We might wrap up with just one more question. Within our industry, what do you feel are the key success factors in delivering value to the client in times of constant change? So we'll lead out with Gavin and Noel.
Sure. Yeah, well, listen, from an operations point of view, I think our clients really value flexibility and simplicity, and I think that was really evident during the height of the pandemic. That flexibility was key to a lot of our clients. Our ability to deliver, our services, fast and with quality is very important. And of course, an excellent customer experience should the customer ever have any issues. I think from an operations point of view, they're the key three drivers, I would say, yeah.
I know.
Well, I'd add
final
in
thoughts?
network. I would say was another key driver there. To have a very solid network, you need to have best in class and make sure that it is constantly being updated and upgraded and really running well. That is key for me. And also, again, when we talk about support, that it can be being proactive as opposed to reactive, making sure you're on top of any alarms or any systems that come in. That's what will in turn make sure that our customers are having a sort of a good experience.
Brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank you all for your time and your insights, and we mightn't have all the answers, but we certainly have a few thoughts on it. So we might just wrap up here. And speaking of value on our last point, I'd like to hand back over to our wholesale team and to Vieira Longcar, who's going to give you a very time-bound offering, and hopefully it adds some value. So thank you all, our viewers, for tuning in, and we'll pass over to Vieira to close out.
Thank you, Cormac. We believe that adding more value to our customers is an important factor in improving our products and innovating our services. Therefore, we decided to introduce a trial offer for our business customers in the form of a flexible contract for all of our on-net locations. It would include a 30-day cancellation option. This trial offer would be available until the end of August, with a possibility of extending it into more permanent option. For any additional information, please reach out to us on wholesale@virginmedia.ie. We hope this offer will help you in transition any state of flux you might find yourself in. Finally, we would like to thank all of our loyal customers for showing us their constant support, and we're looking forward in continuing to grow our business together. That would be all for today, and thank you very much for joining us.